The last few weeks we've been looking at questions that Peter asked, because Peter asked the questions that really helped Jesus, to be honest with you, to kind of like continue to define the power of the kingdom that he was demonstrating and talking about. For instance, when Peter asks about forgiveness and Jesus presents to us a parable, also the power of forgiveness, and Peter asks a question and Jesus has the opportunity to deal with what we see as power, possessions, prestige, position, privilege, a lot of different P's. Last week we wrapped it up in John 18. We wrapped it up in the garden when he says to Peter, put away your sword. And I'm not saying he said it with anger or tremendous emotion. I don't know how he said it, but I know he said it. Now this was at the end of his ministry. He's about to go to the cross. And one of the most powerful things he could say to any of the guys is, forget your swords. That time is over. It's not might makes right anymore. None of that stuff. Put away your sword, your pride, your position, the whole thing. Well, we're done with Peter and his cues, and we're moving on. I think probably all of you know this, called an inner circle with Peter, James, and John. They were the ones that you're finding going up on the Mount of Transfiguration. And there's always that inner circle around him. We won't go into that per se, but we are going into the inner circle with James and John, because they also did the same thing. They gave Jesus the opportunity to speak into the misunderstanding, not just the disciples, but that we have, and we continue to have 2,000 years later, about power. We're going to be with James and John a bit, the rest of the inner circle, and some of their questions. And actually, we're returning to where we were 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, Peter asked the question, basically, what am I going to get out of it? And Jesus went into the parable about the workers going out at different times and getting paid. So where we are tonight is back in Matthew 20 and Mark 10, parallel accounts of the same thing. I'll keep reminding you of where we are in the chronological events, because it really helps a lot with what we're doing tonight is dealing with a subject that really permeated Jesus' ministry. And it's an easy one to miss because a lot of times things sound so similar. What we're talking about is the disciples' quest for position, for promotion, for prestige. And they sound so similar that at times you would think, oh yeah, I read that over in Matthew. I remember that. But it's a different time. They're all different times where this question about greatness comes up. And it's very interesting. It seems to always pop up when Jesus talks about going to the cross. It's fascinating. To me it is. That Jesus would be talking about his suffering, what was going to happen to him, his crucifixion, his death, his burial, and his resurrection. He always included the resurrection. But dovetailing right off of those conversations, we're going to look at them. So which of us is going to be the greatest? And part of me looks at it and think, I don't know exactly what I'm thinking. Part of me looks at it and thinks, what? And then the other part of me thinks, I guess they really had this power fixation. And they understood basically the nature of what Jesus was talking about, that he was overcoming, that he was Messiah, and there was going to be this glorious kingdom as a result. So they kind of had a way, it sounds like, of just listening to what he was saying about suffering, but then projecting the results and saying, okay, what am I going to be like in the kingdom then? That's sort of what I see, because I don't think they were bad guys or anything. They were just guys, and we're carrying this very power fixation from the Old Testament that our ship has come in. In any event, to show you kind of how this works, last week we were in John 13 with the foot washing and that whole thing. We were talking about the power of humility. And there were a lot of questions that are in the Last Supper. When you look at John 13, 14, 15, 16, a lot of conversation, a lot of questions. In Luke 22, it's just like the other gospel accounts. He's discussing his suffering. He's talking about the new covenant. He announces his betrayal. Now, I'm running through this very quickly. This was unfolding as he was speaking with them. You talk about emotionally charged. Well, here's what Luke records. Would you read verses 24 through 30?
There arose also a dispute among them as to which one of them was regarded to be greatest. And he said to them, the kings of the Gentiles lord it over them. Those who have authority over them are called benefactors. But it is not this way with you. But the one who is the greatest among you must become like the youngest, and the leader like the servant. For who is greater, the one who reclines at the table or the one who serves? Is it not the one who reclines at the table? But I am among you as one who serves. You are those who have stood by me in my trials. And just as my Father has granted me a kingdom, I grant you that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom, and you will sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel.
This is at the Last Supper. If you read the whole chapter, it really does pop out at you that Jesus is having this very personal, sensitive, emotional thing, and an argument breaks out among them who's going to be the greatest. But that wasn't like the first and the only time. It would be the last time because it was at the Last Supper. Now I'm kind of going backwards. Where we're going to be tonight, we're going to actually read from Mark 10 instead of Matthew 20. That would have been about a month before the Last Supper. So it was very recent. It was the third time Jesus talked about his suffering, the cross, the crucifixion at that time. And that's where we're going to be tonight. But even before that, Jesus announces he's going to suffer, he's going to die, the whole thing. And this is what Mark writes.
They came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he began to question them. What were you discussing on the way? But they kept silent, for on the way they had discussed which one of them was the greatest. Sitting down, he called the 12 and said to them, If anyone wants to be first, he shall be last of all and servant of all.
It gets the point that they arrive at a house. Jesus knows what they were talking about on the road. Once again, they were arguing about who was going to be greatest. This would have been before the passage we're going to be in tonight, in Mark 9. We're going to be in Mark 10. Would you go back the next chapter, Mark 8, and read verses 34 and 35.
And he summoned the crowd with his disciples and said to them, If anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the Gospels will save it.
By the way, and that was following the first time that he spoke about the cross. It's ongoing from Mark 8, Mark 9, Mark 10, an ongoing reference to the cross, which is no Sunday school picnic, that he was going to endure, that those who followed him were going to endure. He wasn't saying, I'm going to the cross, and you guys, you're going to get all the rewards as a result, so just relax, kick back. He's saying, no, we're talking about a kind of a lifestyle here. I'm going to the cross, you'll be picking up your cross and following me. So he's very clear that we're not talking about greatness. It's funny because when they keep raising the situation of greatness, I could just see him smiling and saying, don't worry about it. You are going to, rule and reign in the region. Don't worry about that. Because like we said last week, when you're looking at that way down there, you miss the fact that the people right around you have dirty feet. That's what John 13 was about. Jesus wasn't so focused on his future. Therefore, he was given a name highly exalted above, that the name of Jesus, every knee shall. He wasn't looking ahead to that. He was looking that there was dirty feet around him. And what the Lord is trying to convey to these guys is your understanding and what you're seeking. You're wanting this position. You're wanting this prestige. You're wanting me to promote you to something. That is not at all what I'm about and what I've been talking about and what I've been demonstrating. And I'm not putting the guys down, but what I'm trying to do is show how strongly our mindsets can be and how we can be so fixated on one thing that we absolutely miss the main message, the main point. This power of position thing, it was an ongoing subject and struggle for the disciples all the way through. And if you had the time and you wanted to read, I guess maybe any one of the Gospels, but all four would be great, to read through them and look for how often this greatness thing keeps popping up. And then you can see where Jesus has a real dilemma on his hands because he's demonstrating it, he's preaching it, and they're still not getting it. They're still looking and thinking, but if I have a position, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a position. Like I said, we're going to read the Mark 10 version, verses 35 through 45. It's a chunk of scripture, but we really have to read the whole thing to be able to get what Jesus is on about here.
James and John, the two sons of Zebedee, came up to Jesus saying, Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you. And he said to them, What do you want me to do for you? And they said to him, Grant that we may sit, one on your right and one on your left, in your glory. But Jesus said to them, You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or to be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized? They said to him, We are able. And Jesus said to them, The cup that I drink you shall drink, and you shall be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized. But to sit on my right or my left, this is not mine to give, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared. Hearing this, the 10 began to feel indignant with James and John. Calling them to himself, Jesus said to them, You know that those who are recognized as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great men exercise authority over them. But it is not this way among you, but whoever wishes to become great among you shall be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you shall be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many.
In Matthew's version, in Matthew 20, it says that the mother of James and John is the one who makes the request. That's the only thing that's different. It's irrelevant as to what we're talking about tonight. Likewise, we're not going to get into a big conversation about the cup and the baptism and all that. That's not the point. The point that we're looking at is that James and John approach Jesus, and what they're looking for is a promotion.